ask, what if? What if a tiny group of people had disproportionate control of culture, news, social media, politicians, banking, tech, finance, your nation's policy, and had married almost every presidential child for decades? What if a tiny group had subverted and enslaved your people? Well, let's dream on. What if every aspect of your culture was so manipulated that your television, radio, smartphone, teachers, and even family became completely immersed in the message of a machine orchestrated by this group, where even basic history was used to deceive? If so, wouldn't you be living in Orwell's 1984? And what if we all knew this so intrinsically that comedians joked about it right to our faces without ever connecting the basic dots as to who they were? What if that group's members even acknowledged it in front of you? What if, as a result of their control over politics, elections became meaningless? After all, if both your liberal and conservative options had their allegiances purchased by this outside force, does it even matter who wins an election? And what if that group owned the media so thoroughly that this control was always overlooked and dissents were instantly shut down? What if, while overlooking the obvious group in control, other villains, like white supremacy, were propagandized to deflect from the real elites to keep people fighting one another rather than even noticing their hateful oppressors? And what if that group had constructed cultural Marxism as a means to drive culturally subversive agendas like porn, feminism, and racism that align with communistic ideals as a way to destroy the heritage and family dynamics that built the healthy, productive society they aimed to destroy? And what if that control extended across social media platforms they almost universally owned and ensured all conservative voices were merely controlled opposition that shaped public opinion without ever allowing the sheep to notice who really controlled their minds? Well then, what if through that control and power, they monopolized excessive levels of the wealth of your nation, while through nepotism and bigotry, sharing and passing it on only to people in their club? Would it upset you if this group made up 60% of the nation's richest people? And what if with these riches, these individuals positioned themselves to take control of all companies to ensure they could insert their chosen friends while destroying anybody or anything opposed to their worldviews? After all, if you can't become financially independent, you're forever enslaved. So what if, speaking of wealth, your nation's entire banking system had been architected not to protect its people, but to forever enslave them as a nation into endlessly covering the costs for the ultra-rich and foreign governments, perhaps like our Federal Reserve? And what if that tiny group of people used that control to shape opinions of the masses in favor of policies extremely detrimental to the native people of that country? What if they propagandized the masses to vote against their own wages and for the destruction of their own culture via endless immigration of poor, violent migrants? And what if that group was so bold with their control that they celebrated it right in your face, encouraging their people to embrace, continue, and further this monopoly on power? Would that concern you? Or if they went so far as to celebrate white extinction, enslavement, and genocide? And what if these same patterns had emerged previously in other nations, resulting in conflict and expulsions as the same turmoil and poverty had been pushed on generations of the past? And what if that group, to cover up these historical patterns, had constructed elaborate, demonstrably dishonest stories to deflect any and all critiques? What if those stories contained indefensible plot holes? And what if that history was merely a projection to cover up their prior wrongdoings and to obscure truths about their aspirations for world domination? What if terms they created, like the final solution, were entirely, intentionally misattributed? What if that ideology was once put in place under the rule of that group, only to result in the worst recorded genocide in history? A genocide most are completely ignorant to, as it's not taught in schools or propagandized by Hollywood, perhaps due to aforementioned control. And what if that group has commit multiple genocides, all driven by the same ethnic hatred and a belief of racial superiority? And what if that group was almost universally in control of a global vaccine that was rolled out and coerced into the arms of the masses by controlled politicians and media? What if that vaccine was now resulting in endless illnesses and deaths for all but those in that group? What if that same group used historical atrocities like slavery and the Holocaust to justify endless hatred of the host whites while hiding their involvement in precisely those injustices? What if they were the ones who commit genocide in World War II and enslaved the majority of Africans? And what if you never learned any of these truths, as Hollywood and academia were entirely manipulated to ensure they remain buried? And what if all in power to change it were blackmailed or assassinated by a global pedophile ring run in coordination with corrupt politicians? What if free speech was continuously being limited and restricted to ensure these types of questions weren't even allowed to be asked? What if even right-wing politicians groveled down to this same group to demand people's silence? What if it was made illegal like in Europe? What if you've never heard these questions? What if you've never seen this page as X hides it? Well, it would make sense, as it's clearly censored at every turn, because I ask these obvious questions. But now you know. Now you'll start to see these obvious patterns. So what next? And what if even speaking this truth puts me at risk of shadow banning, suspension, or ejection from social media? If so, it still must be stated because truth matters. So please share this, join this cause, spread the word, awaken the masses. White existence depends on it. Remember when I asked you to dream? What if you don't have to? Because what if this is your nightmare? Well, it's time to wake up, to realize the dystopia, and to demand an end to this societal slumber. But first, we have to get everyone around to simply ask, what if?